Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today we have a special guest, Becky Morrison. Welcome to the show, Becky Morrison. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. So let's get started with if you can introduce yourself in any way you see fit, how would you describe yourself here briefly? What would you say?
So usually when I meet people, I start by telling them that I'm a mom. And then I tell them that I'm a lawyer turned happiness coach. And that's about all we need to get the conversation going. Because when people hear that I started as a lawyer and now I coach people and help them find their happiness recipe, they've got questions, right? Naturally, they're like, how did that happen?
And that's exactly my question here. And I was hoping you'd start like that. So you are a lawyer, a financial professional, turned to a leadership and happiness coach. What prompted that?
So, I mean, it's interesting when people ask that question. There isn't one thing I would say that prompted it. It's the culmination of so I'm 46. So it's a lifetime journey to get to this point, right? And it starts with the way a lot of our stories start, doing all the things that I thought I should do, right? Going to school, getting the degrees, getting the grades, getting the job, having the title, getting the paycheck, and then found myself kind of early in my legal career. I was a litigator and newly married and had a toddler daughter, young daughter. And I found myself one evening sitting on the floor of the bathroom with my toddler in the tub and the cordless phone clipped to the back of my pants, paper spread all around me, toilet seat cover closed, notebook on the toilet seat cover. So I'm doing two things at the same time. I'm bathing my toddler and I'm working with an expert to prepare them for their upcoming testimony. And I think to myself, well, I'm killing it. Like I literally, who says you can't do it all? Like I'm here, I'm a parent, I'm a great mom, I'm having success at work, I'm on track to be partner. And then the next thought, which came less than a beat later was, and I'm exhausted and this is unsustainable. And I'm not sure I'm even enjoying being a lawyer, even though I'm good at it. So what the heck do I do with that piece of information? So that moment was that toddler who was in the bathtub is about to graduate from high school this year. So it was about 16 years ago that moment happened. And what happened in the intervening 16 years was a journey through a career where I really tried to discover for myself and untangle what does it mean to live in a way that I'm aligned with my top priority in each season and that I'm living as happy as possible without getting hung up on what it seems like I quote unquote should do. And so the first step of that was leaving the practice of the traditional practice of law and moving to a hybrid sort of legal administrative role at a law firm where I was able to have a lot more control over my schedule, to be a more present and available parent, to have a little bit more flexibility in my life, but still be engaging and using my brain in the ways that I liked. And so that's the beginning of the story, but it's a winding path leading up to about 3 years ago when I again found myself at a crossroads. I didn't get laid off. I didn't get fired, but practically speaking, I needed to find a new job. And you'd think I would have learned, but I did the same thing. I did, well, what should I do? What could I do? What am I qualified for? And so here you're talking about somebody who's got, a decade plus of significant management experience. So people process background. I'm a barred lawyer. I've got legal experience. The list of jobs I'm qualified for is not short. And thankfully, I had a couple of people say to me, time out, instead of just applying for every job you think you're qualified for, what do you want to do? What is your top priority? I mean, like, this is a conversation, Becky, that you've had with me when I've been in this position. Why are you not having it with yourself? What is your top priority right now? What do you want to be focused on? And that led me to hire my first coach and land on that. What I really wanted to do was work with other people to help them enable their success. And that mission got further refined when I went to my coaching training at UC Berkeley, where on the first day I was asked what my purpose was in sort of this exercise that we were doing. That was one of the questions I was asked. And I answered without thinking. And I said, my purpose in this season is to spread joy. And then I looked around and I was like, who said that? Because I wasn't like consciously aware that was what I was thinking. And that's how I landed kind of squarely in the work that I'm doing today.
That's wonderful. I'm wondering, like, if that is maybe something that is related to our age, because I'm exact same age. I'm going through the same process. I'm in the same boat. I've been in the teaching business, in the teaching career for 2 decades, and suddenly it's like it is nice. I'm good at it. I enjoy it, but there's something I want to do, which is exactly what I'm doing now, which is podcasting. And then it's trying to, like you say, untangle it and see, well, how can I make it work in terms of also finances? And that's something you're an expert in as well. So I'm wondering if it's partly related to our age, but it's also maybe partly related to what is happening around the world with the pandemic, where there is the great resignation and people are realizing, I like my job, but that's not what I want to do. That doesn't fulfill me. That doesn't give me joy and happiness.
Yeah. And so before we even started hearing the words, the Great Resignation, I started talking about what I recognized this to be, which is an era of global reprioritization. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the Great Resignation, in my mind, is a symptom of that. And it's exactly as you've described. People are waking up to the notion that there might be more to life than checking the boxes. There might be more to life than the shoulds, that all of this pressure and hustle and go, go, go world that we live under might not actually be the answer to getting where we want to go. They're starting to realize that happiness doesn't come at the finish line, that it has to come along the journey, that an unhappy journey rarely has a happy ending. And so if I'm unhappy in my day-to-day, I'm kind of, like I need, something needs to change. And the Great Resignation is an interesting thing because I think in some cases it's a mistake. And let me explain.
Okay.
When we find ourselves unhappy, most people look at their circumstances and they decide, in order to solve my quote unquote happiness equation, I need to change one of these circumstantial variables. I need to change my job. I need to change where I live. I need to change how I spend my free time. I need to change my relationship status. I need to change my health. The research says that our happiness, only 10% of it is truly influenced by our circumstances. Mm-hmm. Our biggest opportunity to influence our happiness comes from our daily intentional thoughts and behaviors. And so what we do, though, is we think, okay, I'm unhappy. Something's got to give. Time for a new job. Mm-hmm. And then we go and we get this new job and we solve what we think was the issue with our happiness, but we arrive in that new job and we find, well, we may have solved that. We have not, in fact, solved the important parts of the equation. And so what I find when I work with people one-on-one, because many of my clients come to me in that moment, that like, here I am in this crossroads moment, I need to figure out what I'm doing. The first thing that we actually do is we figure out how you can maximize your happiness right where you are today. Mm-hmm. And the reason we do that is because instead of escaping your unhappiness, I want you to architect your future happiness. And you can only architect that future happiness effectively from a place of maximum happiness.
And it's slowly and it's step by step, right? And I think, as you're saying, I agree with you. It's a big move where you say, okay, now I'm going to start fresh and like clean slate. And and we want to be careful with that. I agree with that. But there's also people who have like their jobs and they're okay. They're not unhappy, but they're kind of satisfied, but they're not happy either. Right. So, and really tapping into that and saying, well, what gives me pleasure? I mean, yes. I wake up and I want to do it, not I have to go to work. Yes. So that is work to try to uncover that, to yes. realize what it is that we can get to be your authentic self. So your book is, by the way, The Happiness Recipe, a powerful guide to living what matters. And I love the term recipe here because I like cooking, I like eating as well. And so I like it's not one size fits all too, as you're saying. It's not just one recipe. You can season it according to your own taste and so on. So let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why I like the recipe analogy too, is mm-hmm. I'm a cook. And I like to use recipes. I know there are many cooks who do not, right? They cook by instinct, by gut, by their past, whatever. But I like to use a recipe, but I also rarely use a recipe exactly as it's written.
Exactly.
And so, and often, like, one of my favorite things to do is to find a recipe, especially now that there's so many on the internet, and then to kind of read through the comments and look at all the ways that people have modified the recipe and think about, oh, well, I could add that, or I could do this, or I could do less of this, or maybe I'll try that. And so, I mean, that's really what it is sort of the notion that your happiness recipe is truly personal. And that one of the big things that trips people up is this belief that we have to be following a standardized recipe for success, and that success is going to result in our happiness. That's not the way happiness works. And so how do you dial into what matters most to you? And so just to back up a little bit, my book is written from the premise that the recipe for maximum happiness is actually super, super simple. Do more of what matters and less of the rest. And now if you're listening and you're like, really, you wrote a whole book about just that idea? Yeah, I did. And here's why. Because even though it's super simple, there's a lot of things that get in the way of us executing on that. First of all, we have to know what actually matters most to us. And that's the first gap that I identify. I call it the authenticity gap. You could also call it the knowing gap. Are we truly tuned into what matters most to us? And can we distinguish in our lives that these are the things that feed that and these are the things that don't? And then the next question is, what do we do with that? And so there's two other gaps. And because we live in a go, 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 do culture, we typically go from knowing straight to doing, which is actually the third gap in my book. It's the physical energy gap. It's how are we executing on that alignment? How are we taking that simple recipe and applying it to our lives? How do we build habits that support that? How do I prioritize? How do I use celebration to fuel my nervous system? Those kinds of things. But the middle gap is the interesting one. It's the one that gets missed most often. It's, do we actually have the supportive beliefs and feelings that will allow us to execute on that recipe? I call it the emotional energy gap. You could also call it the mindset gap. And it's where if you don't spend the time to do that inside work to really shift your beliefs and feelings, you're going to know and you're going to try to do, and then you're going to backslide right to the patterns that you're familiar with. And that's primarily because of our nervous system. So our nervous system also lives in that gap. So that is how I managed to write a whole book about that very simple formula, because I wanted to give people tools that they needed to close each one of those gaps. And often I find when I work with clients, it's a little bit of an iterative process, right? Like, and then you have to work on the mindset, and then you go and do, and then you have to re-explore the no. And then there might be a mindset thing that pops up, and then there might be a doing thing. And then you might be going along, and then you start to backslide and you're like, oop, another mindset thing. And so there's this like very cyclical woven feel to it. But the notion is to empower you with all the tools you need to sort of continually do that and continually adjust as your seasons and your life changes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I can see the skills that you have and that you acquired as a lawyer and a financial professional is applied here. And I think that's something that people should keep in mind. And when I look at myself, okay, my teaching career was not a waste of time, because there are skills that you can carry over to whatever else you want to do. So that is definitely something that people also don't see. They think they're stuck in a career or a job. You can expand and use it in different ways, in creative ways, in other fields. And what you say about like what resonates with a person, I think that's hugely important. And most of the times we don't really know that. So in my experience was I would try things that I don't like, and then say, okay, that's easier to identify. I don't like this kind of job or this kind of situation. And then from then you can eliminate all of that. And then you get to a core self. It's like, yeah, this is what I really like in comparison to the other stuff. So we need some sort of comparison. Would you agree with that? We need something to compare it with in our lives as well.
I think it's different for different people, but I'll speak for myself. I'm a highly experiential learner. And so, yeah, I need to try it to know whether it's a fit or not. And so, in moments where I've been at career crossroads and I've tried to think more broadly, I often have gotten tripped up by saying, well, I don't think I would like that. Yeah. But I've learned that I need to sample it. I need to get a little taste of it to know. For a long time, I was of the opinion, because I grew up raised by parents, one of whom had a very successful corporate career, that's what you do. You work inside of a stable structure, and that is safer and better, and you'll have more success. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I don't think I'd like to be an entrepreneur. Like, I don't think that would feel fun. I think it would feel risky. I don't think I would enjoy it. And then my husband and I, about, I guess it's 7 years ago, started a nonprofit, basketball related, like nonprofit sports team. And I was like, ooh, this is fun. Building something is really fun. I didn't know that I liked this. I didn't know that I was interested in this entrepreneurial stuff. And so it's like, how can you give yourself the tastes of things that you think you might not? I mean, I didn't leave my job and start a business just to try it. But it's like, how can you give yourself a flavor of it to confirm, do you really like it or do you not like it, before you decide to write something off entirely or to go all in on something brand new?
I think it boils down also to the comfort zone that we have, and we don't want to step out of it. It's like, it's something that's like, well, it's nice or it's okay. It's not perfect, but yeah, it's okay. And I will stick to it. But we are afraid of stepping out and trying something new. And I think that kind of exploring, I think that's important, to explore, to find out, to sample, as to again use food analogy, and also with different types of foods. You say I don't like fish, but then there's some types of fish that I try. It's like, well, this is good, you know.
Yeah, it turns out I like fish.
Yourself in your options. I think that a lot of it is because we're afraid of taking a step out of something that's familiar to us, an environment or a job or a career. And I think we do need to try to expand that.
Yeah. And I think some of it too is like recognizing that you're not going to be able to see the finish line from where you sit almost ever. Like if I went back and told that woman sitting on the bathroom floor with the toddler that, oh, by the way, like, you're going to go from this point where you're a litigator and on partnership track to someday being an author of a book about happiness and a happiness and leadership coach, she would have been like, yeah, no, that there's no way. Like, I can't even conceive of that. I can't even see the path that would connect A to B, you know? And, or even like, she would have been like, what's a coach? And why would I do that? And happiness, what? That's so fluffy. Like, why would you ever? And so just leaving room for possibilities that you don't even know yet to arrive. And I've even seen that since starting my business. My business has evolved in ways that I didn't anticipate. I didn't start this business 3 years ago thinking I'm going to write a book about happiness and start, delivering. I knew I was going to coach one-on-one. I didn't know what the specific sort of focus would be, but I definitely didn't foresee delivering programs to other businesses to help people in like an employment context or a team context increase their happiness. I would never have, even 3 years ago, have seen that as a possibility. So not that I didn't know that business to business, information delivery and teaching was a thing. I knew that was a thing. I just didn't see how I would be doing it. Right. And so allowing it to unfold is part of the process too.
I think it's also things fall into place. And even if we don't have a clear plan, we do need to take the first steps and maybe even share the ideas with ourselves, with others, and so on, to kind of formulate something. And so that's something I would tell myself, I want something like this, but I don't know how or when.
Yes.
But once you take that path, I found, and it is quite odd, things slowly fall into place if you are perceptive. And one of the things that has always fascinated me and has always helped me in my life are coincidences, where things happen for no reason, but it's actually it's showing you the path. This is the thing to do. This is the job to apply for. This is the course to take, and so on. And I don't think people listen enough to that gut feeling, that intuition, those like great gifts that we get, if you like, from the universe, that just kind of show up and show us which way to go.
I mean, you're talking my language. One of the biggest and most important lessons I've learned, and this is a more recent learning, is that yes, my brain is incredibly powerful, right? I've done a lot of brain-based activity. I've had a lot of brain-based success. But I am leaning more and more into the notion that there is a decision-making engine that lives outside my brain. And that decision-making engine will, when I trust it and listen to it, not ever steer me wrong. And when that decision-making engine tells me to do something or not do something, I actually don't need to intellectualize it. Mm-hmm. I don't need to be able to explain it. I don't need to analyze it. I don't need to second guess it. And I'll give you like so I've been playing a lot with my intuition, and I'll give you a super silly example. The other day I went to the grocery store and I was just picking up a few things because I was going to make tacos for dinner. And I thought I had pretty much everything, but I forget what I needed, maybe like jalapenos or something. So I'm like, grab my jalapenos and I'm rolling past the meat case and I hear this little whisper like from my gut or whatever. And it's like, buy some ground beef because that's what we use to make our tacos. And I'm like, I already have ground beef. Like, why would I need more ground beef? I'm not buying the ground beef. And I'm like arguing with myself about the ground beef. And then my intuition's like, just buy it. If you already have it, you can always freeze it. And I'm like, I'm good. I don't need the ground beef. Come home. I've got the jalapenos. I go to start cooking. I open the refrigerator. No ground beef. Somebody else had used it for something. Somebody else in my family had cooked something with it early in the week and didn't tell me.
Oh my God. Okay.
And I'm like, why didn't I listen? Right. And so it's those little nudges that you can play with in a really safe way. I mean, that was low hanging fruit. I could go back out to the grocery store and get ground beef, or we could have something else for dinner. It's not the end of the world. But it's like those little nudges that you can start to play with to like develop this relationship with your intuition so that when it comes to the big stuff, you land in the right places, or the places that sort of are going to open the pathway in front of you. Are you in on the Wordle craze?
A little bit. I've been trying. Yeah.
So here's a challenge to your listeners who are Wordle players. I've been talking with another good friend of mine who's also a coach who really is in the intuitive and space. And we've been talking about how we've been playing with our intuition when we're playing Wordle. Mm-hmm. And how using our intuition to like stopping for a minute before we make our first guess and like tuning into our intuition, you get these weird words that come. And then you play them and you're like, you get it in like three guesses. I'm like, oh, this is a fun game. So I just challenge you, if you like Wordle, this is another way you could play with it. And it's an opportunity to connect to that little voice that lives outside of your brain.
Yeah, I think that is hugely important. Years ago, I saw a program called The Secret and by Rhonda Byrne. And when I watched it, I thought it was bogus. I was like, okay, this is non-scientific, it's silly. But okay, I'll give it a shot. So what was amazing is, and the idea is basically, it's very simplified here, but you make a wish. This is my desire. I will do whatever it takes to take that path. And I will actually show the effort. It's not just, I want to win the lottery. But then slowly, again, like we were saying, things fall into place and there is that path and your wish comes true. And I tried it out, and it has to be, in a way, of course, a bit realistic, but you can also stretch it a bit more and say, okay, I would like to have this. And it's amazing how that actually tends to work. And I'm baffled by that in a good way.
Yeah. And for me, it's about striking the right balance of, so I talk a lot about leaving room to co-create, right? Whether you believe in the secret or manifestation or God or the universe or a greater power of some sort or no greater power, I think it's about leaving space in what we do for like the energy to meet us. In other words, to recognize that we don't have to do it all, that there's like an element of coincidence or fate or happenstance or lucky chance that's going to play a role in helping us get where we need to go, and leaving room for that to come in and deliver in ways that you don't even expect. So I'll give an example from my business. I decided sort of middle of last year that I wanted to reach more people, right? I've written this book and I do one-on-one coaching, but there's this middle gap of like, how do I get to more people? And so I put out an offer to start a membership group. It wasn't really a clear offer. I just started floating it. So it's like, I took that action to say, I'm ready to reach more people. And do you know what came? An opportunity to do a year-long program on happiness for a group of attorneys at a law firm. And I was like, well, that was not, I mean, I thought this is where I was going, but no, I'm doing it this way. And I didn't bring that up. Like that opportunity really, truly, without getting into a ton of detail, just kind of developed organically. And so that's a great example of like asking for and then receiving, but allowing the room to receive in an unexpected way.
Yeah. Yeah. My personal experience was after I finished studying, I got my degree, my master's degree, and it was hard to enter the job market. I found a few jobs, but then they didn't last because they would close down and so on. And then I said, I'm going to go to Mexico to teach. And that was just financially, that was probably a terrible decision because I had student loans. I would make minimum wage or even less than that. But it felt right. So it was quite amazing. When I was on the plane, I met this Mexican guy who spoke English fluently, who was working in Alberta in Canada. And he was thrilled. He was excited. He told me, oh my God, your life's going to change. You're going to get married and have kids. And I said, no, I'm just going for a year to teach. And he was right. Everything changed after that. I did get married and I do have my son now. And it's just like, it was amazing that there was this voice that told me this. And I think it was just complete coincidence for me to go to that place in the first place. So it's just kind of, even if it doesn't seem logical, if
This
the
is what
feeling
I'm
is
saying.
strong, like your ground meat example,
Yep.
I would say we need to listen to it and give it a try.
Yep.
Just to go more to also a more scientific view here, neuroscience, I'm fascinated by that. So what are some of the insights you would say that could help us to deal with this this happiness issue by looking at neuroscience and our brain?
Yeah, I mean, so the biggest thing that I've learned, and I am not a neuroscientist, I am just a person, a lifelong learner who enjoys understanding things. And so I'm going to talk about the nervous system, but I'm not going to talk about it in like very scientific terms. I'm going to talk about it in super practical terms. One of the biggest things, and you referenced it, our comfort zone, but one of the biggest roles that our nervous system plays in our lives is to keep us safe. You all have heard of the fight or flight response. Now I think it's evolved to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. There's a fourth now. It's new that I'm hearing, but the notion is that we have sort of this like triggered response that is not a very logical, very high executive functioning place that we go when our nervous system senses threat. Okay, so that's foundational. The second thing that you need to understand is the part of our nervous system that manages that sort of threat awareness. The pathways in the body that go from body to brain outweigh the pathways that go from brain to body by a ratio of 80 to 20%. Why is that relevant? What I think that means, or what the scientists think that means, is that our body actually senses threat before our brain does. Mm-hmm. Okay. Why is that exciting? Well, what it means is that you have an opportunity when you can connect with your body intelligence to recognize that you're going into a pattern, a triggered pattern, like a nervous system triggered place, and do something about it before you get there. Why would you want to do something about it before you get there? Well, there's a couple reasons. First, like I said, when we're in that triggered place, we are not at our highest executive functioning. So if you find that, for example, I'll use a workplace example, that you typically don't function well in conversations that feel confrontational, chances are that that is a trigger for you, that you don't like confrontation, that there's a past pattern programming under that that says confrontation scary, confrontation bad, don't go there. And so your nervous system is triggered. And then all of a sudden you're having the difficult conversation, but you're not even having it from your highest self. You're having it from this triggered space. If you can begin to notice the triggers in your body before those things happen and identify what they are, you can start to work with them. So if, for example, taking that same example, you know that it's I don't like confrontation. When you get that feeling in your gut that precedes confrontation, all you need to know is that gut feeling, oh, I'm about to be triggered. What am I going to do about that? Two choices: work with it or walk away. Mm-hmm. Those are your only two choices. Because going forward means that you're going to be operating at less than optimal levels. So work with it can look like taking some steps to regulate your nervous system and remind it that, yeah, okay, maybe there was a time in our lives where confrontational conversations were quote unquote dangerous. And danger simply means, it doesn't mean like being chased by a big bear. It means I'm in danger of not getting my needs met. But I'm an adult now. I, Becky, am 46 years old, and I promise that I will make sure that our needs get met, even if I go and have this confrontational conversation. And sometimes that acknowledgement can be enough to calm down the system. But there are also some things you can do really quickly to move the energy. Shake, like literally, you see dogs do it. That is how they finish their stress cycle. They shake. You can shake. You can do some breathing. There are some great, simple breathing techniques. One is called vagal breathing, because it's the vagus nerve that's involved in this piece of your nervous system. So if you can go in through your nose for 4 and out for 8, in other words, double out than in, that calms that nerve. So that's something you could do even if you're sitting in a conversation that's starting to feel confrontational. You can have that little brief internal conversation with your nervous system to remind it that you hear it, that you appreciate that it's raising its hand, that you understand it wants to keep you safe, but that you're going to keep it safe. And then you can do a couple breaths, and often that'll settle that feeling. And then you're back to being able to function at your highest in every situation. And so those are just like a small number of a wide list of examples that you can use to regulate your nervous system. But I think being aware of what's going on is the first step. And when I do this work with clients, they're often surprised that they in fact have patterns and that they can actually name those patterns based on where they hit. That the sweaty palms mean one thing and the beating heart means another thing. And the pit in the stomach means yet a third thing. And then the like turning nauseous stomach means a fourth thing. I mean, the list goes on, right? Mm-hmm. The key is not to judge them, but to observe them and to allow them and to recognize them. And I want to be super clear. You're not saying to that pit in your stomach, like, shh, I got work to do. You're saying, I hear you and thank you, but I got you.
Mm-hmm. See, now you're speaking my language as well. I think there's all these unconscious factors that are at play that we don't realize. And often we're too hard on ourselves. We're too judgmental. We try to control things. And exactly what you're saying, it's really like recognizing it, identifying it, kind of also figuring out, kind of being curious about it. So yes. Why am I feeling this way? And give it space, give it room to expand. And then it kind of dilutes and goes away in many cases where you realize this is not really a threat. But a lot of people are on the defensive because they're scared. And so it comes out in anger. It comes out, and again, the brain is not functioning optimally, as you're saying. And what happens, the amygdala kind of takes hostage of the higher parts. So you can't think rationally, and you can't expect that person to think rationally. So yes. It's kind of, we have to be careful also on the other side when we're receiving the anger from that person, not to take it in a personal way and realizing, oh, they're feeling threatened. They're feeling threatened for whatever reason. We don't really know, but it's that thing that's going on. And a lot of it, as you're saying, I think comes from childhood patterns, from experiences we've had, negative experiences. And yes, the body and the brain is trying to protect us from it.
Yep.
But in many ways, yes, we're out of that situation. We're not stuck there. We need to move on. We need to grow up. And it's like maturity is not necessarily your age. It's really your emotional maturity being able to deal with those feelings. And again, not being dragged back to that state, that emotional state that we had when we were children or younger.
Yeah. And I mean, look, the reality is you're probably not ever going to stop being triggered.
Of course.
It's not about growing out of the triggers. It's about how quickly are you regulating from that trigger? How quickly are you coming back to a baseline place of nervous system control? And, the more work I do with this with clients, and then even in my own life, the more like you find layers and layers and layers, right? Like I'm aware of this stuff. I've been working on it for sort of consciously for multiple years now. And just the other day, my husband and I were having a contentious conversation, and all of a sudden I popped up and I'm bouncing around the kitchen, and he's like, then he's getting frustrated because why are you not listening to me? You won't even pay attention. And I realized, I literally went right into a pattern of like, I can't handle this situation. I need to escape. And my escape didn't look like leaving the room, but it looked like leaving that very close space. And then I was trying to subconsciously trying to move the energy out of me by moving. But once he kind of called it out, I was like, oh yeah, no, what I really needed to do was either actually excuse myself and take a few deep breaths, or just ask him to can we pause this and take a couple deep breaths together to just bring the level of this conversation back down to where we can hear each other. Because ultimately we love each other and that's what we want.
And you can't reason in that state, and you can't expect the other person to reason. Exactly. No. Absolutely. No. I think one of the things for me is my Chinese horoscope sign is rabbit, and we don't like confrontation. I want peace. And I took it in the sense of, I don't want to have confrontational discussions in the first place, because that could trigger it and I would avoid it. But what happens is things get much worse that way. So you do need to open up to that. And even if it feels uncomfortable, like you're saying, get triggered, to go through that process. And the more you do it, and that's the great thing about the brain too, the more you do it, the easier it will get. And it's like any skill, and this is also a skill. The more you practice, the better you get at it. And then the less worried you are about it. And it becomes more automatic.
Yes. And I mean, there's something too, like the thing I want to say, tying it back to happiness, is this notion that living a happy life isn't about not ever having tough things happen, not ever having tough emotions, not ever being in the tough stuff. To me, though, it's about this. It's about being able to work with and move through and allow the tough things to move, right? And so when I think about, because I'm similar, I'm not a huge fan of confrontational conversations, as I just described. And but then when you stop to think about, well, what is underneath that fear? And do you know what almost always is underneath that fear? Not all the time, because there are some that this is not the case, but certainly with people that I'm close to, what is underneath that fear almost all the time is two things. One is love. Mm-hmm. I love this person and I don't want to hurt their feelings and I don't want to have a tough interaction with them because I love them.
Makes sense.
And two, I don't know if I deserve to have my needs met. Mm-hmm. So worthiness is also usually under that fear, mm-hmm. but it's being able to like really be in a place where I can name that and remind myself that I am just as my husband or my son or my daughter or my friend deserves to have their needs met. And I love them and I want to meet their needs. They love me and they want to meet my needs. And how do we do that if we cannot talk about our needs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that might not be always a fun conversation.
Mm-hmm. And being aware of them. And many times we're not even aware of our needs and what makes us happy and what we want from the other person. And what I think in terms of relationships is also, it goes both ways, and it needs to be give and take. There needs to be balance. It needs to be, my needs are met, but so are yours. And if it's lopsided or one-sided, then that's not gonna bring happiness for anyone.
Right.
Either one of in that relationship. And what about, with children? I think that with it, there's a lot of challenges, responsibilities, and so on, but also a lot of happiness, just the simple fact of having a child. And you mentioned that, which I really like to say, a happy mom, and you enjoy that. But what are also some of the learning experiences that maybe your child has taught you how to be happy? Is there anything that we can talk about here? What would you say?
I mean, I could spend 12 podcast episodes talking about the things I've learned from my kids, right? I mean, but what I want to do in terms of talking about parenting and happiness is remind people that this is an area where, like it's like every other area, where it is incredibly important where your focus is. Mm-hmm. If you focus on the challenge, you will find more challenge. If you focus on the good, you will find more good. And that is not to suggest, and I want to be really clear, when I say focus, I don't mean focus exclusively, right? It's not ignore, mm-hmm. but it's like, what are you savoring? If you think about it back in that food context, right? If I sit down to eat dinner and I eat my favorite dinner and I don't really think about it, and I'm in front of the TV, and then all of a sudden I look down and it's gone. Versus if I sit down at the table with my favorite dinner and I light a candle and I really enjoy each bite. What are you savoring? Are you savoring the challenge or are you savoring the positive? Mm-hmm. And when you savor the positive, that changes your whole perspective on the situation, including the challenges. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy right now because the world is a stressful place. There are so many things going on. Raising kids in I'll say a quote unquote normal circumstances is a challenge in and of itself. Raising kids in these circumstances is like a layer cake of challenge.
Yes.
But how can you savor the good things? Mm-hmm. How can you let those be the noisiest parts instead of the challenge? And my kids, have been a part of this journey of me sort of leaning into this happiness world and writing this book. And so we talk a lot about this stuff, and it has changed the fabric of our family because we notice the little good things in a way that we never used to. We used to allow them to sort of mindlessly pass. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so I would say that is the biggest happiness lesson that I've learned kind of more recently as a parent.
And also to go with the flow in many ways of being in that moment of that age, because I know a lot of parents are anxious, and myself included, and we want the best, and we try to push too much and push them on, and maybe just let them be in many situations. That's one thing, and just accept their age, right? So this is their stage. This is how they feel. This is how they reason. And then later on, they become critical. And then you wish they would go back to the earlier stage. Because now it's like good criticism that I have to take. And it's like, you know what, you're right. And so being able to accept all the different phases and stages, I think is hugely important too.
Yeah. And I have another big one that comes up a lot for me is this is just a reminder that if you haven't recently asked your kids what they need from you and what they want from you to do that. Because the other thing that I confront a lot of is sort of that parental guilt of like, I'm not showing up as a parent the way that I believe that I should in order to be a quote unquote good parent. And I want to remind you that the only thing you have to do is be the parent that your child needs. Mm-hmm. But in order to be the parent that your child needs, you have to know what they need. You have to know what matters to them. You have to know what kind of interaction and engagement is significant to them. And you have to know what they feel that they might be lacking.
And each one is different too. And
100%.
Exactly.
And you might be surprised. You might be surprised to learn that, like I'll just take a simple example. There's the parent who says, well, I can't get to school during the day to go to the event. And I feel like that, they must be so sad that they're the only person without a parent there. And then when you sit down and talk to the kid, they're like, why would I care about that? We eat dinner together every night, or we go running together, or we go and play soccer in the yard, or you're at every soccer game, or whatever the alternative thing is that has value to them is what they're focused on. But we get so hung up in our head that we're not delivering what we think we're supposed to be delivering and da, 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 da. Have the conversation. Have the conversation. And if you're thinking, Becky, my kid is 2, have the conversation. Yes. But have it in a way that a 2-year-old can appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you like doing most with mommy? Mm-hmm. And just take their answer. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if they're 2, it's going to change in about 24 hours. You should ask it again. but you know what I mean? Really be willing to start that dialogue. And I think that's important for 2 reasons. One, it allows you to be free from the guilt that you might be carrying that's misplaced. And number 2, you're teaching your kid, and we talked about this, to identify what they want and need and be willing to ask for it, that it's safe to do that it's safe to say what I want and what I need.
And to take this again further and to look back and what were my needs when I was a kid, and often they were not met or fulfilled for various reasons.
Yep.
And without getting in a place of blame and so on, but just realize, okay, these are the things that lacked in my relationship with my parents. Now I want to make sure that my children have those and the needs are met. And really looking at that, because a lot of people just are triggered, like you're saying, and unconsciously they reenact the same way they were treated when they were children. And then you get into that vicious cycle that's doing nobody any good and creates more unhappiness in the family.
Yeah. And even with those needs, I still think the conversation is important, right? Mm-hmm. Because if I think about back to my own childhood, I couldn't really even name specific, but let's say I grew up feeling like I wished my parent was more present. I don't really think that was true for me, but let's just say, right? And then as an adult, I say, well, I want to be a really present parent. I have notions as an adult of what that means, but what would it look like for my kid if I was present? How would they define the important moments? We have an agreement in my family that when kid events or really any family event comes up, we get to ask, is this a, you really want me there or you don't care? Mm-hmm. And they're allowed to say, I don't care. And then I get to decide, do I still want to go? Because it's important to me to be there. Mm-hmm. That's fine. But it takes the pressure off. And when somebody says, I really wish you could come, I really would appreciate your support. That's the thing that I'm moving everything that I can to do. Do I do it 100% of the time? No. Can anyone do it 100% of the time? Probably not, right? Life is life. Things come up. We have client demands. We have work demands. We have life demands. We're sick sometimes. Stuff happens. Mm-hmm. But knowing that it matters then and being able to do the repair from not being there in the moment is equally important.
Yeah, I think being mindful about that, mindful of the situation, what would be the response that the person wants? And again, reacting to that and being responsive to that, that is hugely important too. And just looking at also negative experiences. And as we're saying, we're talking about happiness, but in many cases, I think it's really those unhappy moments, those moments of suffering, those dark times. They have been the most fruitful. I've learned so much from them. And it's actually the main reason why I took this path. And once it's very uncomfortable, it's not a good feeling, but I think don't avoid it, don't evade it, because it has so many lessons there that you can take from it and you can grow in that situation. And whereas if you're always happy, I think I wouldn't want that too, because there's a lack of growth there.
That's right. And I mean, let me just add that there's a cyclical nature to that too, because the research suggests that when we have these positive emotional experiences, so when we're living happier and having more positive emotional experiences, we do two things. In the moment of experiencing the positive emotion, we actually broaden our perspective. So we're better problem solvers, we're more creative, we're more equipped to like find the path forward. And we deepen. What does deepen mean? We actually literally put deposits, this is the way I think of it, deposits into our resilience piggy bank. We are building the foundation so that when those tough times come, which are inevitable, we have the sort of savings to weather them, and to weather them in a way that we're then allowed to grow after them. And that we, that we aren't like set back to the beginning and having to start all over. And so it's like this to me, it's this very cyclical thing of like, I want to invest in happiness whenever I can, like I want to buy it with every spare moment that I have, not stealing from the tough stuff, because I want to live that too. I want to experience it. I want to allow it to flow through me. I don't want to bypass it. I don't want to pretend it's not there, because if I do that, that creates more problems. I don't want those. But whenever I have a neutral or an available moment, I want to fill it with positive, so that when life brings the tough and the free moments get smaller, I have the strength to get through.
Yeah, investment is too. I mean, we think of it in terms of money, but we don't think of it in terms of, again, time or emotions and so on. But that is an investment too. And even a relationship is, if you see it in that sense, it's an investment of again, time and effort and so on. And if it's misplaced, you're going to lose out. So it's that realization too, and investing into your I like the piggy bank, the positive piggy bank that will help you to give you a sense of feeling, I got this. If something happens, it's not overwhelming. I can manage it. And I like the idea of hurdles, because hurdles are there to be overcome. We jump over them. It's not something that it's not a wall that stops us, it's a hurdle, and we jump and we get better at it and so on. So we keep training. So I think it's also our mindset that's hugely important here, of not seeing as a complete like threat, as overwhelming, but being able to again, invest in ourselves through introspection, through thinking, through analysis and so on, and then be able to deal with situations better. And then each time get stronger as we go and become more resilient, I think.
Yes. And in those tough moments, right, in those seasons where perhaps on average, the negative is outweighing the positive, you still grab the positive while you can. You don't have to abandon the positive, right? Like you don't, I think, emotions or feelings are a funny thing. And we have this notion, and I think it's probably like somehow energetically or somewhat energetically true, that like happiness and sadness can't coexist in the same moment, but for sure they can coexist in the same 60 seconds. And they can coexist in the same hour and the same day and the same week and the same month. And so in my mind, when we think about it in a little bit broader than the moment, we really have a super highway of emotion running through us at any given time. And what we've been trained to do is to close a bunch of the lanes. I don't want you to close any more lanes. Let all the lanes be open. Let all the lanes be open all the time. But as often as you can, drive in the lanes that are neutral to positive. Like focus on those lanes, look for those lanes, invest in those lanes. But sometimes you'll be driving in the slow lane, and that's okay too.
That's okay too. Absolutely. And things don't last. So if all things will pass, things don't last. That is good and bad. Because
that's right.
Your happiness will not last, but also your sadness will not last. And that's how life is. And we go through those stages. And I think it's also not just thinking too much about like, am I happy every moment? Just enjoying the ride, and just being in there. And I like Elaine. So just go with the flow, enjoy it. And then if you notice something interesting, be ready for a detour, or pick up something, or stop by and have a coffee. And that kind of like, I think analogy would help to just also relax. Yes. And I think we have the need to be happy. This is where we're born with it. This is something as children, you don't start thinking about worrying about things as a child. You're just happy in that moment. And that's what I've learned from my son, who is a toddler. He was just be in that zone. And I felt like so envious of that. But I do get that sometimes when I am intensely focused on something that I enjoy, and that is the same thing. So it's kind of also carried over through adulthood. And just do that, tap into that, do as much as you can, have that moment of your day, say, okay, this is me time. My needs are going to be met in any way I see fit, as long as you don't hurt others, of course.
Yes.
But, and you won't, because I think things that make us truly happy will also make yourself and others happy. And if it's not doing that, then it's not happiness, right? So
right. Yeah.
It goes hand in hand with also doing good. And I think that is one of the reasons why we are in this phase, and both of us here combined, of like, we want to share that happiness with others. We want to make others happy too, because it feels good for us, and we want them to feel good. And I think that is how humans generally are. But we get confused and distracted and afraid and so on. So
that's right. And the cool part is happiness is actually contagious.
Yes.
And so what I find is when I'm working with clients, right? And I, it's not, I just want to make clear, like, so I'm a coach, I work one-on-one, and it's not like we sit down and talk about like, how are we going to feel happy today? That's part of what we talk about, but it's a much wider conversation that's really sort of more closely aligned to my book of how do you want to build a life that's going to allow you to invest in a maximum way in your happiness. I mean, that's really what it comes down to on an everyday basis. So, what was I going to say? Oh, one of the most fun things to watch is as they shift how they're living, as they shift how they're thinking, as they shift how they're behaving, as they shift what they know, seeing the ripple effects on the people around them, yes, on their coworkers, on their family, on their communities. So it's like not just about one person living happier. Mm-hmm. Everything shifts.
Yes.
And so that's the really fun, exciting part for me in this work.
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for this conversation, Becky. So your book is The Happiness Recipe. Again, love the title. You have a butterfly on your cover. Any specific reason for, I like butterflies, but any specific reason for that symbolic meaning?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons, and I'll start, there's a little quick story. So a couple years ago, a good friend of mine was sending her first child off to college. And she was understandably sort of like excited and grieving, right? As we do in those moments of transition. And I said to her, but it's, like the exciting part is this is her butterfly season. Like you get to watch her spread her wings and see what she's going to bring to the world. And then as I was reflecting on that conversation, I was like, well, I went to college when I was 17. Was that my butterfly season? And if so, what have I been doing for the last 29 years? Or at that point, 27 years. Because that's kind of a bummer. Like, I don't want that to be my only butterfly season. And one of the very first foundational concepts I talk about in the book is the notion that our life is a series of seasons, right? That it's not, you don't pick like a top priority and then that stays your top priority for your whole life. Your priorities shift as your seasons shift. And we can have long seasons and short seasons. We can have seasons that we choose and seasons that find us. But I think life is a series of seasons, but it's also a series of butterfly seasons, maybe not always in order, but there are, caterpillar seasons, and there are cocoon seasons, and there are beautiful butterfly seasons. And I think honoring which one you're in can actually remove a ton of the tension and friction that can drive unhappiness. So
wonderful. Thank you so much. And you also have a website, untanglehappiness.com.
Yes, that's right. And that is like one-stop shopping. If you're looking for a link for the book, it's there. If you want to connect with me on social media, it's there. And if you want to learn more about the coaching and education work that I do, it's there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for talking. This is such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Best of luck to you.